Some murders are unpredictable and come completely out of the blue, and they can be the hardest to solve, especially if they are the so-called stranger murders, where the victim and perpetrator were hitherto unconnected. But perhaps the most disheartening of murders are those where there were red flags and alarm bells that went unheeded. So the consequence some people may have seen coming comes to pass, with the usual tropes of lessons will be learned, or we knew it was bad but we never thought it would come to this. Now, one case that fits into this particular category comes from 2018 and a city that I've recently become more familiar with, given that it is the home region to two of my very best friends. And that region is, of course, Southampton on the south coast of the UK. This is the abhorrent and most likely preventable death of schoolgirl Lucy McHugh, which means a trigger warning is in order for sexual abuse and violence towards a child. This is Murderous Crows. Southampton is a city on the south coast of the UK. Located within the county of Hampshire, it is about 80 miles southwest of London. Much of its historical significance is linked to its existence as a major UK port. In the Middle Ages, it was the departure point for troops heading to the Battle of Agincourt. It was an early departure point for the Mayflower, and it was also the departure port for the Titanic. Because of its nature as a port of military importance, Southampton was a key target for bombing in the Second World War, and it was also a major embarkation point for D-Day operations. In non-seafaring history, the Spitfire was built in the city, and Jane Austen lived in Southampton for several years. It acquired city status in 1963, and Southampton is deeply interwoven into UK history. Now, for this case, I think the best way to approach telling you this horrific tale is to go through the chronology in terms of the triggering event for the investigation, before we later look back at the background that led to that triggering event actually happening. And it's with this in mind we need to go to Wednesday the 25th of July 2018 in Southampton. Lucy McHugh was, to all appearances, a normal 13-year-old girl. We will discover later that Lucy's life was far from normal. but she lived in a home on Mansell Road East with her mother Stacey White and stepfather Richard Elms. The family also had an occasional lodger called Stephen Nicholson, who was the best friend of Lucy's stepdad, and was staying at the home as a stopgap since Nicholson had fallen out with his mum, and they ordinarily lived just down the same road that Lucy lived on. Perhaps not a completely normal home environment, but helping a family friend would seem to be a positive thing to do. Now, Lucy liked Harry Potter and theme parks and always enjoyed visiting Cornwall on holidays. But on the 25th of July 2018, she seemingly vanished without a trace. Within hours, Lucy's mum and stepdad were sick with worry. Their wait for an answer would be relatively short, but would not end with a happy reunion. Lucy McHugh's body was found in a wooded area of Southampton Sports Centre at 7:45 a.m. on Thursday, July the 26th. And the 13-year-old was located near to a cricket pitch and the Alpine Sports Centre within the facility. Police cordoned off the area and later confirmed they had launched a murder investigation that they named Operation Refund. The cordon remained in place for several days, and thorough search was conducted of the area around where Lucy's body was discovered. And the public rallied around, and on 2 occasions a number of local people banded together to help search the grounds of the sports centre for any murder weapon. Police believed a bladed article, perhaps a knife or scissors, were used in the murder. In fact, upon examination, it was found that Lucy had been stabbed a minimum of 27 times. A level of overkill that was perhaps suggestive of a personal relationship between Lucy and her killer, but this is just conjecture, I guess, at this stage. Police also searched Lucy's home in Mansell Road East, and they also searched an area of nearby Hollybrook Cemetery. Public reaction, as one might expect, was shock, then grief, and at times anger and frustration. The news of Lucy's death and the subsequent murder investigation was quickly shared by hundreds of people via Facebook and Twitter, and Hampshire Constabulary said that its media appeal reached more than 1 million people. Soon after the news was broken, a fundraising page was set up to help pay for Lucy's funeral. It aimed to raise £5,000, but within just a few days had raised more than £7,000. A balloon release was later conducted at Mansell Park near to Lucy's home by her friends. Her head teacher at Redbridge Community School, Jason Ashley, paid a touching tribute to the 13-year-old and expressed his shock at her death. The main focus of the police's appeal began with sightings of Lucy in the period between 9 a.m. on Wednesday, July the 25th, when Lucy was last seen at her home, and 7:45 a.m. on Thursday, July the 26th, when her body was found. Police released images of the clothing that Lucy was wearing. Officers said that she was wearing a black jacket with white sleeves, with the logo for the band falling in reverse on the front, and Radkey 01 in red on the back. She was wearing a white top, camouflage-coloured leggings, and black Nike Jordan trainers. At first, little was known about Lucy's movements between her last sighting and her body being discovered. But within a few days, police made a breakthrough in their investigation when they uncovered CCTV of the 13-year-old as she walked by a convenience store near to the sports centre. CCTV captured the moment Lucy walked past the Tesco Express store on the corner of Coxford Road and Lordswood Road at 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, July the 25th. Also CCTV of the teenager walking past the Premier convenience store on Wimpson Lane from 9:06 a.m. on July the 25th, and further CCTV showing her walking on Coxford Road past Southampton General Hospital at around 9:25 a.m. that same morning. Detective Superintendent Paul Barton, the man leading Operation Refund, described the investigation as one of the biggest in the recent history of Hampshire constabulary. Officers continue to sift through more than 15,000 hours of CCTV footage from more than 250 locations. And the police also needed to deal with the influx of tips after the police appeal, whether they were helpful or not. And they received over 200 reports from members of the public. Almost 200 officers were involved in the investigation. And the high volume of work and lack of early progress led to Hampshire Constabulary enlisting the help of officers from the National Crime Agency, or NCA, further bolstering the resources at their disposal. Crime Stoppers offered a £10,000 reward for information, leading to an arrest and conviction. Investigation into Lucy's home life leading up to her disappearance and murder indicated that the teenager's life was not picture perfect before she went missing. The family home was plagued by arguments, primarily between Lucy and lodger Stephen Nicholson, and also between Lucy and her de facto stepfather, Richard Elms. As I mentioned earlier, Nicholson had lived at the house as a lodger for about a year because he had fallen out with his mother. Nicholson had been best friends with Richard Elms since they were children. And this weird chap would keep pet reptiles in the house, and he said he stored cannabis in a kitchen drawer to sell to friends and clients. The extent of the arguments meant Lucy repeatedly decided to leave home and live with her grandparents, Dawn and Darren White, including for one period of 6 months until about May of 2018. Richard Elms revealed that there would be arguments the majority of the time in the house, saying that many were between Lucy and Nicholson. And ultimately this led to him asking Nicholson to leave the house just a few days before the murder. He described witnessing one argument between Lucy and Nicholson as like walking in on a war zone. Entries in Lucy's diary also expanded on this, with one particular entry describing having to barricade her bedroom door to stop Nicholson forcing his way in on one particular occasion. And the friction in the home extended to tension between Lucy and her stepdad too. Richard admitted to sending a message to Stacey, the teenager's mother, saying, "I'm going to end up punching Lucy." To which Lucy's mum, Stacey White, replied, "If you punch a child, you will end up in jail. So is it worth it? Seriously?" And Stacey later sent another anguished message saying, "She is going to end up in care. She is accusing all of us of hitting her and throwing her about." So even in the early stages of the investigation, police were focusing on people close to Lucy. And in particular, they were looking at 24-year-old lodger Stephen Nicholson. And pretty early on, he was arrested on suspicion of murder and engaging in sexual activity with a child. And following initial interviews, they were granted an extension to continue questioning the suspect. But this could only ever be up to 96 hours, so they knew that they were going to have to bail the man that they considered their prime suspect. So they came up with a plan to ensure that Nicholson would not be released while the investigation was still ongoing. In interview, Nicholson told detectives that Lucy had sent him a Facebook message the night before she was murdered, in which she told him that she was pregnant. This obviously gave officers a reason to look more closely at messages between Nicholson and the vulnerable teenager. But they soon realized that Nicholson had changed his Facebook password prior to his arrest, and he refused to hand over the password, denying the police access to whatever information may have been contained within his account. Nicholson claimed that he withheld his password to avoid reprisals from his criminal contacts. But even so, this showed little regard for finding Lucy's killer, if he was, as he claimed, actually innocent. But the police were locked out of his Facebook account, and with no direct evidence linking him to Lucy's death, police needed more time. A request directly to Facebook would involve a lengthy route through the US courts, and this would be well in excess of the 96-hour limit that the detectives were working against. And the answer was so-called terrorism legislation, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or RIPA, normally used in cases involving national security. This is a surveillance law that can cover all serious crimes. So while the dickhead was bailed, he was also immediately rearrested and charged under RIPA for failing to comply with an order to hand over his password, a charge that he later pleaded guilty to at Southampton Crown Court, with him being jailed for 14 months. And with Nicholson no longer at large, police had vital time for further investigations. With him being kept in custody, it meant he would be unable to tamper with any evidence. If we'd used any other legislation, he might not have been locked up. The words there of Senior District Prosecutor John Montague. But even with Nicholson safely locked up, the investigation was lacking a smoking gun. There was nothing to physically link the spot where Lucy's body was found to Nicholson. The murder weapon remained unaccounted for, and no DNA was found at the scene. Once again, investigators focused on Nicholson's online accounts, and this time they enlisted the help of a cloud data analyst. And their job was to study pieces of information sent from Nicholson's phone to data servers owned by companies such as Google. And while tracing the phone's route on the day of Lucy's murder, the analysts noticed a small blip at an area police had not yet searched. And this blip suggested that Nicholson had deviated from his most direct route home. And it was a diversion that took him to Tanner's Brook, a stream which cuts through Southampton, weaving its way through woodland in the western half of the city. It was a slight deviation on his telephone. You could almost say that it had jumped a mast, and these were the words of Detective Superintendent Paul Barton, who went on to say, "It was a great bit of work from the analyst who pointed it out." Now, this very subtle shift was enough for police to launch the constabulary's largest ever fingertip search, which involved 190 officers from 12 other forces. By now it was 4 weeks after Lucy was found, but on the first day of the search, police got the breakthrough that they wanted. They found a bag containing a blue blood-stained hoodie, among other items, and this garment contained Nicholson's DNA and Lucy's blood. He is thought to have dumped the clothing, some of which had been partially burnt, near the brook after getting changed on his return from the murder scene on the 25th of July. Prior to the discovery of the clothing, police had no other direct evidence of Nicholson's involvement in her killing. They tested fibres from her blood-stained jacket and Nicholson's clothes, which suggested direct contact with the hoodie. Detectives established that hoodies of the same type were sold to only 2 people in the Southampton area, and one of them was given as a present to a man who knew Nicholson's friend. The DNA evidence was the final nail in the coffin for Nicholson, according to Detective Superintendent Barton. While there was a very strong circumstantial case against Nicholson up to the point of the bag being found, it would be the genetic evidence that Detective Superintendent Barton classed as the bit to sink him. And he went on to say that the interim sentence for Nicholson probably helped to leave this bag in situ, with him saying regarding the first sentence that the 14-month sentence bought us time and stopped Nicholson getting to Tanner's Brook. With the case progressing to trial in July of 2019, where Nicholson's grooming and abuse of Lucy would be fully revealed, Detective Superintendent Barton said police had been able to build a case against an extremely narcissistic, self-centered, violent sexual predator. He has destroyed a family who had looked after him, put a roof over his head. He has taken all of that, groomed Lucy and lost interest in her, and that was his motive. Lucy was described by prosecutor William Mosley QC as vulnerable and was receiving care from child and adolescent mental health services, which had diagnosed her with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Lucy's stepfather, Richard Elms, told the court that she had self-harmed and that the kitchen door was kept locked to keep her away from knives. The lack of stability in Lucy's life was also shown by her changing secondary schools after just 1 year. Southampton City Council's social services were alerted by her schools after Lucy told friends that Nicholson was her boyfriend. She also told friends that he had got her pregnant and that she had had an abortion. The court heard that Nicholson first abused Lucy when she was just 12. And this continued right up until her disappearance and vicious murder. In a surprise to absolutely no one, Nicholson was found guilty. In sentencing, and I will show the full sentencing remarks on screen, and I will put a link to them in the video description, Mrs. Justice May held nothing back in explaining why the sentence needed, quite rightly, to be extremely lengthy to account for the aggravating factors, which included Lucy's age and vulnerability, Nicholson having planned the crime in advance, the ferocity of the attack, and Nicholson trying to hide or block access to evidence. Nicholson was ultimately sentenced to life with a minimum term of 33 years.
Back then I never thought the day would come that I'd get caught for something that I done. I'd run around quick time robbing you to get the always off my head. Should've been headless, so I found myself stuck putting in the work. And to get mine I didn't care who I hurt. Done my time, I don't wanna do more. Ain't worse if I'm stuck up in the cell, cause I'm looking out for number one starting now. Keep my head down, cause my tracks going out. Life was is what this track's all about. Now I find myself stuck putting in the work, and to get mine now, no one needs to get hurt.
This investigation is a good example of old versus new, I would suggest. So you have the good old-fashioned detective work that is knocking on doors, house-to-house inquiries, speaking to eyewitnesses, and then you layer that with some of the technological evidence that we get nowadays. So that could be through phone data and CCTV, and slowly when you start laying that on top of each other, it starts to build a really strong, compelling picture as to what someone's movements are. And so when we had the phone data in relation to Nicholson's movements from the time he left the area of the sports centre back to his mother's, we could see that he wasn't taking the direct route that one would expect him to take, and that there was a slight deviation. And so we explored that further and then made the decision to then search that area, and that's when we had that crucial find of the murder kit, I would suggest. Well, this is one of the largest murder inquiries that Hampshire Police have seen over the years. We had hundreds of people working on this for many months, putting together a really comprehensive case, which fortunately has seen Nicholson found guilty now.
And how many officers were involved?
At any one time, I would say probably about 200 officers at the height of the investigation, but we had various resources coming in and out to assist the inquiry. We had a large search team that was using additional resources from other police forces. We had additional investigators being brought in from other police forces. So it really was a huge investigation at a time when resourcing was a challenge for us over the last summer period. Well, it was one line of inquiry that we were pursuing, but there were obviously many other inquiries that we were looking at. And to credit to Facebook, they did contact us very early on in the investigation to try and assist us where they could. But unfortunately, they are tied with their own legal processes. And so we had to go through a very lengthy legal process with the Crown Prosecution Service through to the Department of Justice in the United States to try and get information from them.
And how long did that take?
That took many months, and in fact the final result came in on the first day of the trial, which showed that there was no way of recovering the deleted messages from Nicholson's Facebook account. We're told, I'd say you probably need to ask Facebook that, but we asked all the questions that we could ask of Facebook. They've done their very best to try and assist us, but the material we were looking for couldn't be recovered. Well, Lucy was vulnerable by definition of her age, at the age of 13. But there's a serious case review ongoing at the moment, which is standard practice when sadly a child dies, involving all agencies, including the police and social services. So it'd be wrong for me to comment until we've had the results of that review. I would describe him as cold and calculated. I would describe him as a paedophile, and I think he's somebody who only thinks about himself, has taken full advantage of this family that have looked after him, provided him a roof over his head. Yet with his sexual appetite, he has targeted Lucy, taken advantage of her, and when she wanted a relationship with him, he has taken the decision to silence her once and for all by brutally killing her. I think there was. I think there's a lot of signs that would suggest that Nicholson had been planning this, maybe only for a few days, but the fact that he had ordered trainers in advance, the fact that he had lured Lucy to the sports centre at a time when they were supposed to not been talking to each other, the fact that he seems to have come up with various excuses to why his DNA may be found on her clothing, the fact that he's deliberately put himself on CCTV at Tesco Express on the morning in completely different clothing, and that he's then telling people that the witnesses may have seen somebody with a tattoo and on a bike. I think all these things indicate to me that he knew exactly what he was doing, which makes this even more vicious. I can't really answer that. I mean, he probably knew that Lucy was vulnerable, and there's always a suggestion that vulnerable children try and self-harm to get attention. So he may well have been doing that, I don't know. Well, the searches were huge, and the first ones were scoping the CCTV and securing hours of footage to enable us to identify Lucy's last movements, but also identify Nicholson and his movements. And then we had a major breakthrough through communications data, which identified that Nicholson had taken a slight deviation from his route back to his mother's address into Tanner's Brook. And so we took the decision to search Tanner's Brook, a major breakthrough by finding the clothing that had Lucy's DNA and Nicholson's DNA on it.
And was that DNA leak crucial to the prosecution?
I would say so. I think our case at that point was a strong circumstantial case, but by having the DNA evidence, I think that was the final nail in the coffin for Nicholson. We didn't know that at the time, but this investigation has certainly uncovered that he has an unhealthy interest in young girls under the age of 16. We heard about his tattooing business where he's tattooed young children, and obviously it's been established now in court that he's had sexual relations not only with Lucy but also with another girl who was under the age. That's certainly a theory. We know that he had a whole range of customers there, so adults as well. But I think what he was a predatory paedophile who then took those opportunities when he identified vulnerabilities within young girls and took that to the next level by sexually abusing them.
A report released in 2020 shows that chances were missed to help Lucy in the months before she was murdered. Both police and social services were criticised in the report. Concerns that Lucy was being abused were not investigated. This is according to the report by Southampton Safeguarding Children Partnership. This report said that Lucy's teachers had flagged concerns that she had an older boyfriend who could be sexually exploiting her. But social workers considered that the concerns had no foundation because they were given assurances by Lucy's mother. And as a result, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, or MASH, did not follow up on the concerns, and no information was connected with any details held by the police, by the school, or by social services. Lead reviewer for the report, Moira Murray, said the referrals needed to be treated as one of child protection. If this had happened, a strategy discussion could have been convened concerning the risk this man posed to Lucy and her family. This did not happen and was a missed opportunity. The report added that Hampshire Constabulary showed a lack of professional curiosity by not further investigating Nicholson's background when he came to their attention prior to Lucy's death, including when it became known that he was tattooing underage young people. Southampton City Council's Executive Director apologised to Lucy's family for the council's shortcomings and said that it had made a number of changes and was determined to keep improving its procedures. Basically, boil that down to lessons will be learned, as we always hear after such tragedies. Stacey White, Lucy's mum, had released a tribute to her daughter on what would have been the young girl's 14th birthday in October of 2018. She said that Lucy was killed just as she was beginning the adventure of her life. Stacey described her as a mixture of fun, laughter, generosity, kindness, and whose biggest critic was herself. a smiling, content little dolly who everyone adored and cherished. And she directly addressed Lucy in saying, "You soared through your life doing so many things. You never let anything stand in your way. You loved so many activities, sports, art, drama, music, travelling, beaches, and so much more." And that was the horrifying case of the abuse and murder of a vulnerable teenager at the hands of a predator hiding in plain sight. Nicholson, unquestionably a cockwomble, as we know, is exactly where he belongs. And it's so frustrating to learn the chances were missed to step in to protect this young girl. This video is of course dedicated to Lucy McHugh, whose life was only just beginning. She had such an enjoyment of life and such huge potential. She would undoubtedly have gone on to do great things and be a bright light in the world. And I send love and condolences to her friends and family. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Please like, subscribe, share, and do all of the good stuff if you haven't yet. It really is appreciated. I'm Steve. This feline wrecking ball is Samson. And we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that